There was a time when Ben Simmons seemed to have it all. A 6'10" point guard with the vision of a veteran, the defense of a watchdog, and a physique that made others look small. They compared him to LeBron James without it sounding exaggerated, and he was chosen number 1 in the draft as if it were the logical step in a story that was already written for success. But in the NBA, stories don't write themselves, and Simmons' story ended up taking a turn that no one expected. Injuries, strange decisions, an eternal conflict with his own shot, and moments in which he seemed to lose the spark that had taken him so high. Today at 28, he is no longer the star who was going to lead franchises, but a player looking to fit into a lesser role and in a market that no longer looks at him the same way. This is the story of how a generational talent went from being the future of the league to becoming one of the hardest and most bewildering falls modern basketball has seen. Before the NBA turned him into the next big project, Ben Simmons was already a force of nature in youth basketball. Raised in Melbourne, the son of Dave Simmons, a former professional player who left his mark in the Australian League, NBL, with the Melbourne Tigers, and a mother connected to sports, Ben grew up surrounded by backboards, balls, and locker rooms. From a young age, the court was his second home. At 15, he was already dominating in Australia, but the real leap came when he moved to the United States to join Montverde Academy in Florida, one of the most prestigious schools for producing stars. Montverde wasn't just a regular school team, it was a machine for developing future NBA players. There he played alongside talents like D'Angelo Russell, and even then, Simmons didn't just stand out, he dominated. He had the size of a power forward, the coordination of a point guard, and court vision that seemed factory installed. On paper, he was a small forward, but on the court, he did everything. He ran the floor like a guard, rebounded like a center, and defended as if he had infinite energy. The numbers were obscene for a high school player: 28 points, almost 12 rebounds, natural leadership, and a feel for the game that made him seem like a professional infiltrated into a youth tournament. Montverde swept 3 consecutive national championships, and he was the engine behind each one. He won convinced and made it clear that he was a step above the rest. The hype skyrocketed. Scouts and journalists talked about a guaranteed franchise player, and even Magic Johnson went as far as to say he was the best prospect he had seen since LeBron James. And they weren't random comparisons. At 6'10", he could defend all 5 positions, initiate the offense, find the open teammate with pinpoint passes, and score at will in the paint. But as often happens in the middle of all the euphoria, there was one detail nobody wanted to look at too closely. Simmons didn't shoot from distance. In high school, it didn't matter because he was so strong, fast, and skilled that he always found a way to get to the rim. No one saw a problem with it, at least not yet. The feeling was that with his talent and the right training, that detail wouldn't make a difference. After all, he was so far ahead of the rest that it seemed like just a matter of time before he added it to his repertoire, although, of course, there was also the possibility that he never would. With all the top college powerhouses behind him, anyone would have bet that Ben Simmons would end up at Kentucky, Duke, or Kansas. But he surprised everyone and chose LSU, a program that wasn't part of the college basketball elite. The reason was personal. His godfather, David Patrick, was an assistant coach there. It wasn't the typical path for a number 1 prospect, but LSU treated him like the arrival of a savior. They launched a massive marketing campaign with the slogan, "The 25th is coming," used his number to sell season tickets, and made him the absolute face of the program. On the court, he more than delivered. He averaged 19.2 points, 11.8 rebounds, and 4.8 assists per game, something only one other freshman had done in NCAA history, Michael Beasley. He led LSU in points, rebounds, assists, steals, and double-doubles, with a total of 23. He was named SEC Freshman of the Year, first team All-SEC, and consensus All-American in his first year. Some nights felt like they came straight out of a video game, like his performance against North Florida: 43 points, 14 rebounds, 7 assists, 5 steals, and 3 blocks, all without hitting a single shot outside the paint. He had other flashes, just as striking. Against Vanderbilt, he posted a triple-double of 14-10-10, the first by an LSU player in 20 years. Against Kentucky, in a game packed with scouts, he put up 14 points, 10 rebounds, and 3 assists, though in crunch time, his lack of an outside threat became noticeable, and there was the warning sign already starting to show. Throughout the entire season, he attempted only 3 three-pointers, not 3 per game, 3 in total. Off the court, warning signs also began to appear. Simmons was suspended for 1 game due to an academic violation, basically not meeting the minimum attendance requirements, and he himself admitted that he stopped going to class once his NBA eligibility was secured. He said his focus had to be on improving as a player, not on oceanography or other subjects. For some, it was pure professionalism. For others, an early sign that his commitment could be selective. The problem was that, even with the best prospect in the country, LSU finished 19-14 and didn't even make it to the NCAA tournament. They lost in the SEC quarterfinals and ended the season on a bitter note. Among analysts, doubts began to take shape: inconsistent leadership, body language that dropped during losses, and a non-existent outside shot that sooner or later someone was going to exploit. But none of that stopped the train heading to the NBA. The talent was there, and the general thinking was that, in the right environment, he could polish any flaws. For the Philadelphia 76ers, the decision was automatic. After years of the process, accumulating losses and draft picks like gold in a vault, they finally had the #1 pick in their hands, and a prospect who promised to change everything. Ben Simmons was a perfect fit: the size of a power forward, the ball handling of a point guard, versatile defense, and court vision that seemed out of this world. The connection with the franchise went beyond scouting. Brett Brown, the Sixers coach, had coached Dave Simmons, Ben's father, in Australia, and had known Ben since he was a kid. On June 23, 2016, with the Barclays Center as the stage, Simmons was selected #1 overall in the draft, becoming the first Australian in history to achieve that. The city got excited in a way it hadn't since Iverson. He signed his rookie contract for 4 years and $26.6 million, and the expectations were immediate. With Joel Embiid finally recovering and Croatian Dario Saric arriving from Europe, Philly was starting to look like a real team. In the 2016 Summer League, Simmons made a first impression that fed the hype. He averaged 10.8 points, 7.7 rebounds, and 5.5 assists, showing he could dominate a game without needing to score much. The plan was clear: to develop him alongside Embiid as the duo that would change the franchise's destiny. But that plan fell apart before it even began. In the final scrimmage of training camp, Simmons landed awkwardly after a play and fractured the 5th metatarsal in his right foot, the dreaded Jones fracture. A tricky injury in basketball because the area has poor blood flow and recovery time often takes longer than expected. At first, reports were optimistic: 3 or 4 months out, return by Christmas. But Christmas passed and Simmons was still sidelined. In February came the final blow: he would miss the entire season. For Philadelphia, it was a bitter deja vu, reminiscent of what had happened with Embiid in his rookie year. A whole year without debuting, a whole year to work on his body, and above all, on that outside shot that still hadn't shown up. It was a forced pause, but also a unique opportunity. What no one knew was whether Simmons would take advantage of it, or if it was the first warning sign that even in an ideal scenario, something could go wrong. The wait was worth it, or at least it seemed that way. October 2017, a year after being selected in the draft, Ben Simmons finally wore the Sixers jersey for an official game. The city welcomed him like a savior, and he didn't disappoint. In his debut against the Washington Wizards, he recorded 18 points, 10 rebounds, and 5 assists. 4 games later came his first triple-double with 21 points, 12 rebounds, and 10 assists against Detroit. It wasn't just a good start, it was a message. He was here to stay. His rookie season was one to remember. He averaged over 15 points, 8 rebounds, and 8 assists per night, a combination that only a handful of players in league history had achieved in their first year. He also finished among the top 5 in the entire NBA in total steals, showing that his impact wasn't limited to the offensive end. The end of the regular season was a statement: 16 consecutive wins, the longest streak in franchise history, many of them without Joel Embiid on the court. Simmons proved he could carry the team and be the engine that kept everything running. The connection with Embiid quickly became one of the league's biggest attractions. On the court, their chemistry translated into outstanding performance. Off the court, the smiles and praise seemed genuine. The Sixers finished with 52 wins and, for the first time since 2012, returned to the playoffs. In the postseason, Simmons didn't shrink. In the first round against Miami, he averaged 18 points, over 10 rebounds, and nearly 9 assists, becoming the first rookie since Magic Johnson to record a triple-double in the playoffs. Magic himself said Simmons had the potential to be one of the greatest players of all time if he developed a shot. The year ended with him lifting the Rookie of the Year trophy, earning 90 of the 101 first-place votes, beating out Donovan Mitchell in a rivalry that had already sparked both on and off the court. For Philadelphia, everything seemed to fit. Embiid would be the interior force, and Simmons the brain on the perimeter. But even in the midst of all that shine, there was one detail impossible to ignore. Throughout the entire regular season, he didn't attempt a single three-pointer. In the modern NBA, a starting point guard who didn't shoot from distance was a rarity. At the time, it seemed like an anecdotal stat, a curiosity that would soon be forgotten, but over time, that curiosity would grow into an ever larger shadow. After a debut like his, anyone would have thought the next step was obvious. add an outside shot, expand the repertoire, and become a complete superstar. But Ben Simmons' story began to show another side. Between 2019 and 2021, he was selected to the All-Star game 3 years in a row, led the league in steals, made the All-Defensive First Team twice, and in 2021 finished second in the Defensive Player of the Year voting, behind only Rudy Gobert. On paper, everything seemed fine, but behind the awards, the stats started telling a different story. His numbers were practically the same as in his rookie year. In 2017-18, he averaged 15.8 points, 8.1 rebounds, and 8.2 assists. 4 years later, in 2020-21, he was at 14.3 points, 7.2 rebounds, and 6.9 assists. There was no jump, no progression. The outside shot, quite simply, never arrived. In his first 4 seasons, he attempted just 34 three-pointers in 275 games, an average of 0.1 per game. In 2019-20, for example, he made only 2 of 7 attempts the entire year. From mid-range, the numbers were just as telling. In his rookie season, he attempted only 30 shots from 5 to 7 meters, while a young point guard like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was attempting over 200 from that same range. Brett Brown, his coach, even publicly asked him to take at least 1 three-pointer per game. Simmons responded with 2 attempts over the next 33 games. Even more puzzling, although he took his free throws and jump shots with his left hand, 80% of his close-range attempts were with his right. J.J. Redick once said he believed Simmons was right-handed by birth, but had learned to shoot left-handed. And every summer, like a ritual, the videos would appear from empty gyms. Simmons hitting threes, going on perfect shooting streaks, training with specialists. Social media would fill with hope, fans would get excited, and then, once the regular season started, everything went back to the same. The nickname came naturally, Lab All-Star, the laboratory star who never replicated in games what he showed in workouts. Still, his impact remained real. Elite defense, unstoppable in transition, court vision like few others. But the ceiling was there, clearly visible, and he didn't seem willing to push through it. And the league, sooner or later, was going to put him in a situation where that flaw would stop being a detail and become an impossible problem to hide. The 2020-21 season seemed like the perfect moment for Simmons and Philadelphia to make the definitive leap. The Sixers finished as the top team in the East, with Joel Embiid playing at an MVP level and Simmons established as one of the league's best defenders. The path to the finals looked more open than ever, but in the playoffs, the brightest lights also revealed the deepest shadows. In the conference semifinals against the Atlanta Hawks, Simmons had the worst series of his career. From the free throw line, it was a historic disaster. 15 makes in 45 attempts, a 34.2% that was not only the worst of that postseason, but the worst in playoff history for a player with at least 70 free throws. Even worse than the worst years of Shaquille O'Neal or Wilt Chamberlain. The Hawks went after him with a hack-a-bend strategy relentlessly, knowing he would miss, and his offensive aggressiveness vanished. In the last 3 games of the series, games 5, 6, and 7, he scored just 19 total points. In the fourth quarters of the last 4 games combined, he attempted only 3 shots, and then came the play that would mark him forever. Game 7, 3.5 minutes left, Philadelphia down by 2. Simmons receives the ball under the rim, spins, and in front of him is Trae Young, a defender nearly 30 centimeters shorter. It was the only time in the entire series he got the ball so close to the hoop against a defender under 6 feet 3 inches. He had a clear path to dunk it, but he didn't. He passed the ball to Matisse Thybulle, who went to the line and made 1 of 2. The crowd fell silent. Embiid raised his arms in disbelief. In the press conference, Doc Rivers was blunt. When asked if Simmons could be the point guard of a championship team, he answered, "I don't know." Embiid, without naming him directly, said, "The turning point was when we had an open shot and only got 1 free throw." That night, Philadelphia, the number 1 seed in the East, lost to an Atlanta team that had entered as the 5th seed. But what remained wasn't just the defeat, it was the image. A player with the basket just inches away, unable to take the shot. What used to be, he needs an outside shot, turned into, he's afraid to attack the rim. What once seemed like a technical flaw now looked like a mental block. And from that moment on, the relationship with the city, with the team, and with his own image began to fall apart. The play against Trae Young was no longer just a mistake, it became the symbol of a player who, in the most important moment of his career, let the opportunity slip away. After Game 7 against Atlanta, the relationship between Simmons and Philadelphia was shattered. There was no meeting to smooth things over, no plan to rebuild trust. What followed were leaks, public statements, and a growing distance that threat widened with each passing week. At the end of August 2021, Adrian Wojnarowski confirmed what was already suspected. Ben Simmons had requested a trade and had no intention of wearing a Sixers jersey again. He didn't show up for media day, an unusual move for a franchise player, and made it clear he wouldn't attend training camp. The team responded harshly. For each preseason game he missed, he would lose around $360,000. Fines for missing practices, meetings, and official games piled up until they reportedly surpassed $19 million withheld from his salary, according to The Athletic. In a strange twist, Simmons suddenly showed up at a practice on October 19th, but his return was anything but normal. He arrived with a phone in his pocket, refused to take part in group drills, and when Doc Rivers asked him to join a defensive drill, he repeatedly declined. Rivers kicked him out of practice and suspended him for conduct detrimental to the team. Soon after, Simmons cited mental health issues as the reason for not playing, but refused to work with the team's medical staff, saying he would only see his own specialists. For the front office, it felt like an excuse. For him, it was a matter of broken trust after Rivers and Embiid had called him out publicly following the loss to Atlanta. Meanwhile, his relationship with the fans hit rock bottom. Even in his absence, the Wells Fargo Center crowd booed him and chanted, "We want Dame," calling for a trade for Damian Lillard. What was once a story of promise and rebuilding had now become a public divorce. In February 2022, after months of fines and unbearable tension, the end finally came. Philadelphia traded him to the Brooklyn Nets along with Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, and draft picks in exchange for James Harden and Paul Millsap. On paper, it was a fresh start for Simmons. In practice, it would be the beginning of an even more confusing chapter. The trade to Brooklyn in February 2022 looked like the great comeback. A new team, a massive market, and the chance to start fresh without the weight of Philadelphia's failure on his shoulders. The Nets needed defense, size, and an elite passer. Simmons needed a place where he wouldn't be asked to be the offensive savior. With Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving alongside him, everything seemed to fit until reality set in. He never made his debut that first season. First it was his back, then his mental state, and just when it seemed like a return was near, his back again. In March, just weeks before the playoffs, he received an epidural injection for a herniated disc and was ruled out. The Nets were swept 4-0 by Boston, and during the series, an uncomfortable detail came to light. Simmons had left the team's WhatsApp group after someone asked if he was going to play. A small gesture, but one many interpreted as a sign of complete disconnection. In May 2022, he underwent surgery. The plan was simple: have the operation, go through rehab, and start the 2022-2023 season with a full preseason. But what followed was an endless chain of frustrations. He played just 42 games, averaging 6.9 points, 6.3 rebounds, and 6.1 assists, and not a single three-point attempt. Beyond the numbers, the player who once attacked the rim like a freight train seemed to have vanished. Issues with his left knee, combined with chronic pain in his lower back, kept him out for long stretches, and his mobility was no longer the same. In an attempt to find a role for him, coaches moved him from pure point guard to small ball center, trying to capitalize on his defense and rebounding. But even there, his impact was inconsistent. And while he publicly spoke about working on his mental health, his body language on the court said something else. He passed up open shots, avoided the free throw line, and seemed to play with a mental handbrake at all times. The 2023-24 season was even tougher. Just 15 games played, less and less involvement, and the sense that even he no longer believed in a comeback. In 3 seasons with the Nets, he totaled only 90 games. Far too little for a max contract, far too little for a player who had once been a 3-time All-Star. In February 2025, the story ended with a buyout. Simmons gave back part of the money, and the Nets waived him. There were no standing ovations, no tributes, no final great game to remember him by. Just the uncomfortable silence left behind by a chapter that promised so much and delivered almost nothing. The ending in Brooklyn left Simmons in an uncomfortable limbo, too young to retire, but with a history of injuries and absences that made him a risk for any franchise. He was no longer the #1 draft pick carrying cosmic expectations, but a player who needed to convince everyone and himself that he could still contribute. In that context, Los Angeles emerged. The Clippers signed him to a minimum contract, more as an experimental gamble than a guaranteed reinforcement. He didn't arrive to lead or play a starring role, but to fulfill a specific function: versatile defense, rebounding, and some playmaking off the bench. With Kawhi Leonard Paul George, and Russell Westbrook at the helm, the idea was for Ben to be that quiet cog that keeps the machine running. His debut was a small glimpse of what he once was. In 27 minutes, he put up 12 points on a near-perfect 4 of 5 shooting and 4 of 4 from the line, along with 7 rebounds, 6 assists, 3 steals, and 1 block with no turnovers. He closed the game in overtime, briefly reminding everyone that his ability to impact the game without high scoring was still there, hidden beneath layers of frustration and injury, but the old shadows returned quickly. Back pain, the left knee acting up again, and once more the calendar crossed his name out. Every comeback attempt came with limited minutes, and each time he tried to push harder, his body reminded him that the NBA waits for no one. In the rotation, he went from being an intriguing piece to an almost testimonial player with sporadic appearances and no real impact on the season. The buyout with Brooklyn, finalized weeks before his arrival in Los Angeles, had marked the end of his time as a big contract player. What happened with the Clippers was more symbolic than anything else. One last attempt to prove he could still be useful, even if it was no longer clear whether that would be enough to keep him in the league. Today, Simmons is a free agent. Miami has emerged as a last-minute suitor, seeing in him a low-cost experiment. And while the opportunity is there, the real question is different. How much actual value does he still have beyond the name and the past? Because the player who was once hailed as the future of the NBA now only carries a reduced contract, a fragile body, and a story told more in conditionals than in certainties. It's hard not to think about what could have been. About that kid from Melbourne with such obvious talent, it seemed he was immune to failure. About the rookie who broke the mold with his size and court vision. About the all-star who, without needing to shoot threes, could dominate games through defense and transition. All of that is still there, but like an old photo, intact in memory, worn down in reality. Maybe in another context with a different body and a different ending, we'd be talking about a legend. Today we talk about a mystery, and as with all great sports mysteries, the answer lies not in what he did, but in what he never got to do. Drop your thoughts in the comments section. This was Hoop Secrets, and I'll see you next time.